A loving couple sits in court, ready to adopt the little girl they've grown to love. But just as the judge prepares to sign the final papers, the child looks up, points at a man in the audience, and whispers a single word that stops everything. Within seconds, the judge orders the doors locked, face is pale, and the air turns electric with shock. Who is the man she pointed at? What secret has been buried until this very moment? And why does the judge seem to know exactly what's going on? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. And if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. In the grand marble halls of the Jefferson County Courthouse, sunlight streamed through tall windows, casting long shadows across the polished floors. The adoption courtroom buzzed with quiet anticipation, the wooden benches filled with observers and court officials. The air held that distinct mix of furniture polish and nervous energy that seemed to permeate all courtrooms. Rachel Whitmore sat perfectly still, her cream-colored blazer crisp and neat, one hand holding Maya's small fingers while the other smoothed imaginary wrinkles from her skirt. Beside her, Daniel adjusted his tie for the 10th time, his usual confident demeanor replaced by barely contained excitement. This was supposed to be their perfect day, the day Maya would officially become their daughter. 5-year-old Maya perched between them in a new blue dress with white flowers, her patent leather shoes barely reaching the edge of the bench. Her dark curls had been carefully arranged with matching blue ribbons, and she kept running her free hand over the soft fabric of her dress, a self-soothing gesture Rachel had noticed months ago. Judge Evelyn Monroe commanded attention from her position on the bench, her black robe settling around her as she reviewed the papers before her. Her reading glasses perched on the edge of her nose as she studied each document with careful precision. Years of experience had taught her to trust her instincts, and something about this case made her want to be extra thorough. In the matter of the adoption of Maya Quinn, Judge Monroe's clear voice rang out. We are here today to finalize the adoption petition filed by Rachel and Daniel Whitmore. She glanced at the couple and the child between them. Are all parties present and ready to proceed? The adoption lawyer stood. Yes, Your Honor. The petitioners are present with their counsel, and the caseworker, Ms. Teresa Langley, is also here to provide her final recommendation. Teresa Langley sat ramrod straight in her gray suit, clutching her leather portfolio. She offered a tight smile when the judge acknowledged her presence. As the proceedings continued, Maya's attention began to wander. Her eyes roamed the high ceilings, the wooden panels, the faces in the gallery. Rachel gave her hand a gentle squeeze, drawing the child's attention back to the front, but something had caught Maya's eye. The change in Maya was subtle at first. Her small body tensed, and her grip on Rachel's hand tightened. Her breathing quickened just slightly, but Rachel noticed immediately. She'd spent countless nights soothing Maya through nightmares to recognize the signs of distress. Then Maya's free hand rose, one small finger pointing toward the gallery. Her voice, usually so quiet, carried clearly through the hushed courtroom. Daddy? The single word dropped like a stone in still water, sending ripples of tension through the room. Rachel's heart seemed to stop mid-beat. Daniel's hand found her shoulder, gripping it tightly. In the gallery, a tall man in an expensive charcoal suit had gone completely still. Michael Quinn, known throughout the legal community for his sharp mind and sharper courtroom tactics, looked as though he'd been struck. His dark skin had taken on an ashen undertone, his expression a mix of confusion and something deeper, something that made Judge Monroe lean forward in her seat. The quiet murmur of the courtroom died completely. Even the usual shuffling of papers ceased. Judge Monroe's voice cut through the silence. Bailiff, secure the doors. No one leaves this courtroom. Her tone left no room for argument. The heavy sound of locks clicking into place seemed to echo off the walls. Michael Quinn stood slowly, his movements deliberate. Your Honor, his voice was steady but held an edge of bewilderment. There's been a mistake. I don't know this child. His eyes met Maya's, and something flickered across his face. Recognition, perhaps, but not of Maya herself. Something else. Maya's response was immediate and fierce. She shook her head hard enough to make her ribbons dance. her grip on Rachel's sleeve becoming almost desperate. "Daddy," she insisted, her voice stronger now, more certain. Rachel felt the world tilting beneath her feet. She'd read every page of Maya's file, seen every document about her background. There had never been any mention of a father who looked like Michael Quinn. The biological father they'd been told about was supposedly unknown, disappeared before Maya's birth. "Approach the bench," Judge Monroe commanded, her gaze sharp as she studied Michael Quinn. The bailiff moved to escort him forward. Daniel's hand had not left Rachel's shoulder, and she could feel him trembling slightly. Their perfect day had shattered into something unrecognizable. Teresa Langley's face had lost all color, her knuckles white around her portfolio. She seemed to be fighting the urge to flee, her eyes darting between the judge and the locked doors. "Your Honor," Michael began again as he reached the bench, but Judge Monroe held up a hand. "Mr. Quinn, while you may not know this child, she seems to know you, or at least believes she does." The judge's eyes narrowed slightly. "Given the circumstances, I'm ordering an immediate DNA test." The courtroom erupted in whispers. Rachel pulled Maya closer, feeling the child's rapid heartbeat against her side. Daniel's grip tightened on her shoulder. "Court is adjourned until the test results are available, which should be within 48 hours. Judge Monroe's gavel came down with finality. "All parties are to remain available to the court. Mr. Quinn, you'll be escorted to provide a DNA sample immediately." As people began to rise, Teresa Langley was the first to reach the doors. The moment they were unlocked, she slipped out, her heels clicking rapidly against the marble floors. In the hallway, she pulled out her phone with shaking hands, moving away from the crowds now spilling out of the courtroom. Finding a quiet corner, she pressed the phone to her ear. "There's a problem," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Someone's figured it out." The next day, the morning sun filtered through the bay windows of the Whitmores' suburban home, casting warm patches of light across the living room floor. Rachel sat curled in her favorite armchair, a cold cup of tea forgotten on the side table. Her eyes kept drifting to the family photos on the wall, particularly the one from Maya's first day with them, her tiny face beaming as she held up a new stuffed rabbit. Daniel paced the length of the room, his usually pristine dress shirt wrinkled from a restless night. Every few minutes, he'd check his phone, though they knew the DNA results wouldn't be ready until later that day. The uncertainty of the past 48 hours had worn them both down, leaving dark circles under their eyes and worry lines etched across their faces. "Maybe it's just a misunderstanding," Daniel said for what felt like the 100th time. "Kids that age, they sometimes get confused." Rachel watched Maya through the doorway where their daughter sat at her little table in the playroom, carefully coloring with her favorite crayons. "She seemed so sure, Daniel. You saw her face." Across town in his penthouse apartment, Michael Quinn stood at his floor-to-ceiling windows, watching the city wake up. His reflection showed a man who hadn't slept properly in days. Those eyes, Maya's eyes, haunted him. There was something so familiar about them, something that tugged at memories he couldn't quite grasp. His phone buzzed on his desk, making him jump. It was his assistant, Sarah. "Mr. Quinn." Her voice was tense. "The lab just called. The results are ready at the courthouse." Michael's hand tightened on the phone. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. The Jefferson County Courthouse looked different today, more imposing somehow. Michael adjusted his tie as he climbed the stone steps, his heart thundering against his ribs. The morning air felt thick with anticipation. Inside the courtroom, Judge Monroe sat at her bench, her expression grave as she met Michael's gaze. Rachel and Daniel were already seated in the front row, both looking as though they hadn't slept any better than he had. Maya sat between them, her dark curls neat and tidy, quietly playing with the stuffed rabbit in her lap. She looked up as Michael entered, and that same spark of recognition lit up her face. Teresa Langley sat rigidly in her chair, her complexion almost gray. She kept fidgeting with her portfolio, straightening papers that didn't need straightening. The court clerk approached Judge Monroe with a sealed envelope. The sound of tearing paper seemed unnaturally loud in the hushed courtroom. Everyone held their breath as the judge unfolded the document inside. Her eyebrows drew together as she read, Then her eyes widened slightly. The silence stretched until it felt like a physical presence. According to these results, Judge Monroe's clear voice rang out, "Michael Quinn is Maya Quinn's biological uncle." The words hit Michael like a physical blow. He grabbed the edge of the table, his legs suddenly unsteady. Uncle. The room tilted sideways as memories crashed over him. His brother David's warm brown eyes, the same eyes that had been haunting him for 2 days. The same eyes Maya had. Rachel let out a small gasp, her hand flying to her mouth. Daniel's arm went around her shoulders, his face a mask of shock. But Maya just smiled, hugging her rabbit closer as if this was exactly what she'd been waiting to hear. Judge Monroe's voice cut through the chaos of whispers that had erupted. "Ms. Langley." Her tone could have frozen water. Why was this information never disclosed? Why wasn't the biological family notified of Maya's existence? Teresa Langley's throat worked as she swallowed. "There were complications, Your Honor." Her voice quavered. "The father was unavailable." Unavailable? Judge Monroe's eyes narrowed. "Explain." "According to our records, David Quinn disappeared 5 years ago after an arrest. He was deemed unfit." "David?" Michael's voice cracked. He hadn't spoken his brother's name aloud in years. "What arrest? What are you talking about?" Judge Monroe held up a hand, silencing the room. "Mr. Quinn, are you saying you were unaware of your brother's arrest?" "He didn't..." Michael's mind raced. "He stopped returning my calls. I thought he was angry with me, that he needed space. I was so busy with my career, His voice trailed off as the horror of what he was hearing sank in. "Ms. Langley," Judge Monroe's voice was steel, "I want Maya's complete case file on my desk within the hour. Every document, every note, every scrap of paper." Michael barely heard the rest of the judge's orders. His world had narrowed to a single thought. His brother hadn't abandoned his family. David hadn't disappeared by choice. As soon as the judge called a recess, Michael was at the clerk's desk, demanding access to every record they had. His hands shook as he opened the first file, scanning dates and documents with the desperate intensity of a man trying to piece together a nightmare. The arrest report was thin, suspiciously so. No proper charges were listed, just vague accusations of public disturbance and resisting arrest. David's signature was missing from several crucial documents. The transfer papers to the county jail had no receiving officer's signature. People disappeared in the system all the time, Michael knew that. But this was different. This was orchestrated. This was his brother, his niece, and someone had deliberately torn their family apart. Maya's placement papers were equally troubling. No attempt had been made to locate family members. The social worker's reports were full of inconsistencies. And David, who had been the most loving, dedicated father Michael had ever known, was described as negligent and unstable. Michael looked up from the files to find Maya watching him from across the room. Those familiar brown eyes, David's eyes, held a wisdom far beyond her years. She knew. Somehow this 5-year-old child had known exactly who he was, had recognized something of her father in his face. The truth sat like ice in Michael's stomach. His brother hadn't abandoned his child. Something far worse had happened to David Quinn, and Michael was going to find out exactly what that was. Hours later, the city lights twinkled like distant stars through Michael's office windows as he sat surrounded by stacks of papers and old case files. His usually immaculate desk looked like a paper hurricane had swept through it. The clock on the wall showed 11:47 p.m., but he barely noticed the late hour. In his hands, he held an old photograph, him and David at their mother's last birthday celebration before everything went wrong. David's warm smile beamed back at him, his arm thrown casually around Michael's shoulders. They looked so happy, so unaware of what was coming. "What happened to you, big brother?" Michael whispered to the photograph. The official report lay open beside him. Armed robbery at First National Bank. Suspect apprehended at scene. The words seemed to mock him now. David Quinn, community activist and devoted father, suddenly turning to armed robbery? It had never made sense, but Michael had been too caught up in his own rising career to question it properly. He remembered the day David had called him, voice urgent and excited. "Michael, I'm close to something big. The foster system. There's corruption at the highest levels. Kids being removed from homes without cause, especially in our communities. I've got proof. That was the last real conversation they'd had. A week later, David was arrested. Then, just like that, he vanished. Michael rubbed his tired eyes, fighting back the guilt that threatened to overwhelm him. He should have known better. David had always been the fighter in the family, the one who stood up against injustice while Michael worked within the system. Now Maya's eyes, David's eyes, haunted him with their silent accusation. His phone buzzed, startling him from his thoughts. It was a text from Judge Monroe. Got your message. Meet James Turner at the records office tomorrow, 7 a.m. He'll help you access the sealed files. James Turner was an old friend from law school who now worked in records management. If anyone could help Michael navigate the bureaucratic maze, it would be him. The next morning, Michael arrived at the records office before sunrise. James was already there, his round face creased with concern as he led Michael through the dimly lit corridors. What you're asking for, James said, glancing over his shoulder. It's not exactly by the book. These files were sealed by direct order from the DA's office. I need to know what happened to my brother, James. James nodded, using his keycard to access a secure room filled with filing cabinets. I remember David from your mom's cookouts. He was a good man. What they said about him, it never sat right with me either. They spent the next hour pulling files and making copies. The more Michael read, the more his stomach churned. The surveillance footage from the bank robbery was mysteriously corrupted. The weapon recovered at the scene had no fingerprints, not just David's, but any fingerprints at all, as if it had been wiped clean. Look at this, James said, pointing to a document. The arresting officer, Derek Matthews. He's got 6 complaints of racial profiling in his jacket, all buried by internal affairs. Michael's pen scratched across his notepad as he copied down names and dates. The witness statement? That's the thing. Matthews was the only witness. No civilians, no bank employees, nothing. Just his word against David's. Meanwhile, across town, Rachel sat at her kitchen table watching Maya eat breakfast. The little girl hummed happily as she spooned cereal into her mouth, seemingly unaffected by the chaos swirling around her. Daniel stood by the coffee maker, his usual morning routine feeling somehow hollow. We need to talk about it, Rachel said softly. Daniel's shoulders tensed. About what? That our daughter might be taken away from us? She has family, Daniel, real family. We're real family too. His voice cracked. We've loved her, protected her, been there for every nightmare and every skinned knee. Rachel reached for his hand. I know. But if what Michael's finding is true, if her father was wrongly imprisoned, then what? Daniel slumped into a chair. We just give her up? Pretend the last 4 years never happened? Maya looked up from her cereal, her dark eyes moving between them. Sometimes Rachel wondered how much the child understood, how much she picked up from the tension in the air. Back at the records office, Michael's phone buzzed with an email from an anonymous account. His heart nearly stopped as he read it. Your brother wasn't just arrested, he was silenced. Look into Senator Beckett's private adoption agency. Follow the money, but be careful. They're watching. Michael's hands shook as he showed the email to James, who whistled low under his breath. Senator Beckett? The same one pushing that bill to streamline adoptions in low-income areas? The very same. Michael's mind raced. David said he had proof of corruption in the foster system. What if he found something connecting it to Beckett? James began pulling more files, these ones relating to adoption cases around the time of David's arrest. Pattern after pattern emerged, children removed from homes on flimsy pretexts, paperwork rushed through, proper procedures ignored. Michael was so engrossed in the documents that the buzz of his phone made him jump. An unknown number flashed on the screen. The message was simple but chilling. Stop looking, or you'll end up like him. Michael showed the text to James, whose face went pale. Michael, maybe you should... No! Michael's voice was firm. I abandoned my brother once. I won't do it again. Days later, the morning sun filtered through the high windows of the courtroom. casting long shadows across the polished floor. Justice Monroe sat at her bench, her expression stern as she surveyed the assembled parties before her. The emergency review of Maya's case had drawn more attention than usual. Several court clerks lingered near the walls, and a handful of attorneys not involved in the case had found excuses to be present. Michael Quinn stood at the podium, his dark suit crisp and his posture rigid with purpose. The leather briefcase at his feet bulged with documents, evidence gathered during his late-night investigation. To his right, Rachel and Daniel Whitmore sat close together, their faces drawn with worry. Maya sat between them, her small legs swinging beneath the bench as she clutched her stuffed rabbit. Across the aisle, Teresa Langley perched on the edge of her seat. Her usually perfectly styled hair showed signs of hasty arrangement, and her hands wouldn't stay still, constantly adjusting her jacket or shuffling papers. "Your Honor," Michael began, his voice steady despite the weight of what he was about to present. "I've uncovered serious irregularities in Maya Quinn's adoption case." He lifted a thick folder from his briefcase. "First and most glaring, there is no record of any attempt to contact biological family members before proceeding with adoption placement." Justice Monroe's eyes narrowed. "Ms. Langley, is this correct?" Teresa Langley cleared her throat. "Your Honor, we followed standard protocols." "Then you can point to the documentation?" Michael interrupted, spreading papers across the presentation table. "Because I have here the complete case file. No contact attempts, no family search, no due diligence whatsoever." The judge leaned forward, her reading glasses perched on the end of her nose as she examined the documents Michael handed up. "Continue, Mr. Quinn." "The Whitmore's application was processed and approved in record time," Michael said, producing another set of papers. "Despite having no prior fostering experience, they moved to the front of a very long line of qualified candidates." Rachel's face flushed red, and Daniel placed a protective arm around her shoulders. They had been so excited to be chosen, so grateful for the speedy process. Now that gratitude felt tainted. "Most disturbing," Michael continued, his voice growing harder, "are these." He held up 2 denied applications. Maya's grandmother and aunt both applied for custody. Both have stable homes, good jobs, and strong community ties. Both were rejected without explanation. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Justice Monroe's expression darkened. "Ms. Langley, explain this." Teresa Langley rose on shaky legs. "Your Honor, there were concerns about the family's ability to provide adequate care." "Based on what evidence?" Michael's voice cut through her excuse like a blade. "Because according to these home study reports, both women were more than qualified." He turned to face Langley directly. "Or was there another reason their applications were rejected?" Before Langley could respond, Michael pulled out one final folder, thicker than all the others. The sound it made hitting the table echoed through the suddenly silent courtroom. "This," he said, his voice carrying to every corner of the room, "is a list of other African American children removed from their families under equally suspicious circumstances over the past 5 years, all processed through Ms. Langley's office, all with the same pattern: biological families ignored or rejected, wealthy white families fast-tracked through the system." Rachel's hand flew to her mouth and Daniel's face drained of color. Maya looked up at them, sensing their distress, and snuggled closer to Rachel's side. "This wasn't just about Maya," Michael said, turning to face the judge. "This is systematic, organized, deliberate." Justice Monroe's face had turned to stone as she paged through the documents. When she looked up, her eyes blazed with barely contained fury. "Ms. Langley, approach the bench." Teresa Langley stumbled forward, her composure completely shattered. "I want explanations," the judge demanded, "for every single case in this file, every rejected family member, every expedited placement, everything." "Your Honor, I can explain." Langley's voice quavered. "Save it for the formal investigation." Justice Monroe cut her off. She straightened in her chair, her voice ringing with authority. "This adoption process is hereby halted indefinitely pending a full investigation into these allegations." Rachel let out a small sob, quickly stifled. Daniel's arm tightened around her shoulders. The Whitmores will retain temporary custody of Maya for now, the judge continued, her voice softening slightly as she looked at the couple. But make no mistake, if these allegations prove true, there will be serious consequences for everyone involved. The remainder of the hearing passed in a blur of legal terminology and scheduling of future proceedings. Rachel and Daniel sat in stunned silence, the reality of their situation slowly sinking in. They had thought they were giving Maya a better life, saving her from a broken system. Instead, they had unknowingly become part of that system's corruption. As the courtroom cleared, Teresa Langley hurried out, fumbling with her phone. In a corner of the courthouse lobby, partially hidden behind a large potted plant, she punched in a number with trembling fingers. "They know," she whispered urgently into the phone, her eyes darting around the lobby. "We need to handle this. Everything. The paperwork, the payments, all of it. They're going to find everything if we don't." She pulled the phone away from her ear, staring at it in confusion. The line had gone dead. The next morning, a police detective found Teresa Langley in her apartment. She lay face down on her kitchen floor, a half-packed suitcase open on her bed, and her passport missing from its usual drawer. The medical examiner would later determine she had been dead for several hours. The case was no longer just about Maya. As Michael stood in his office watching the morning news report about Langley's death, he finally understood the full scope of what he had stumbled into. This wasn't just corruption, it was a conspiracy, and someone was willing to kill to keep it buried. The morning sun had barely risen when Michael Quinn received the call. He was already at his desk, reviewing files from Maya's case, when his phone buzzed with Detective Davidson's number. "Teresa Langley is dead," Davidson said without preamble. "Found in her apartment this morning." Michael's hand tightened on his phone, his knuckles turning white. "Cause of death?" "Looks like an overdose, bottle of pills on the nightstand. Medical examiners calling it suicide." Davidson's voice carried a hint of doubt that Michael immediately caught. Michael was already grabbing his coat, pulse quickening. "I'm coming over." "Quinn, this isn't your case." "I'll be there in 20 minutes. He ended the call before Davidson could protest further. The drive to Langley's apartment complex took him through the quieter streets of the city's east side. Morning commuters were just beginning to fill the roads, unaware that someone connected to one of the biggest cases in the city had just died. Police cars still dotted the parking lot, their lights creating a red and blue dance across the building's brick facade. Michael showed his attorney credentials to the officer at the door and made his way up to the third floor, his footsteps heavy on the worn carpet. Langley's apartment was a modest two-bedroom unit now crawling with crime scene technicians. The body had already been removed, but Michael could see the chalk outline on the kitchen floor. Detective Eric Davidson stood near the entrance, his weathered face tight with concentration as he watched the investigators work, hands stuffed in his pockets. "You shouldn't be here," Davidson said as Michael approached, though there was little force behind his words. "Look at this scene, Eric." Michael gestured around the apartment. "Really look at it." Davidson sighed but followed Michael's gaze. The apartment was neat, almost too neat. No signs of struggle, nothing out of place. A half-packed suitcase lay open on the bed, visible through the bedroom doorway. Clothes were folded carefully inside, as if Langley had been planning to leave town. "The door," Michael pointed out. "Where's the chain?" Davidson frowned, lines deepening around his eyes. "What chain?" "Langley always used a security chain. I've been here before for case consultations. She never left it off. She was paranoid about security." Michael ran his fingers along the doorframe where the chain should have been mounted. The detective moved closer to the doorframe, examining the mounting hardware. There were fresh scratch marks around the screws, tiny wood splinters still visible. "And her phone?" Michael asked, scanning the countertops. "Haven't found it yet." Davidson's tone suggested this detail bothered him too. "What about her home office?" "The case files?" Davidson's expression darkened, his shoulders tensing. "Filing cabinet's empty. Computer's gone too." Michael walked to the kitchen, crouching near the chalk outline. He studied the floor, noting the absence of any pill bottle nearby. "She was making calls yesterday, Eric, right after the hearing. She was scared. Of what? That's what we need to find out. Michael stood, his voice dropping lower. This wasn't suicide. Someone wanted her quiet. Davidson ran a hand over his face, suddenly looking tired, the weight of 20 years on the force showing in his eyes. Listen, Quinn, I get what you're saying, but you need to understand something. He moved closer, speaking barely above a whisper. If someone did kill her, if this goes where you think it does, we're talking about people with serious power. The kind of power that makes problems disappear. Like my brother? Michael's voice was hard, edged with years of pain. Davidson's eyes widened slightly. Your brother's case was before my time, but... He glanced around, then pulled Michael aside into the small hallway. If you're right about this being connected to the adoption system, you're stepping on some very wrong toes. These people, they have connections in the department, in the courts, everywhere. All the more reason to investigate. Michael stood straighter, undeterred. I'm not saying don't investigate. I'm saying be careful. Davidson's expression was grave, his hand briefly touching Michael's shoulder. Watch your back, Quinn. And watch that little girl's family, too. Michael nodded, understanding the warning for what it was. He left the apartment, his mind racing with implications. In his car, he pulled out his phone and dialed Rachel and Daniel's number, his fingers trembling slightly. The phone rang several times before Rachel answered, her voice tight with worry. Michael? What's happening? We saw something on the news about Ms. Langley, ... Are you all home? Is Maya with you? He started the engine, already planning his route to their house. Yes, we're all here. Daniel took the day off work. Michael, you're scaring me. In the background, he could hear Maya's voice, small and curious, asking who was on the phone. Daniel's deeper tones answered her softly, reassuring. Listen carefully, Michael said. Keep Maya close. Don't let her out of your sight, not even for school right now. This situation, it's bigger than we thought. What do you mean? What's happening? Rachel's voice quavered. I can't explain everything over the phone, just trust me. Keep your doors locked and call me immediately if you notice anything unusual. He pulled into traffic, checking his rearview mirror out of newfound paranoia. After hanging up, Michael sat in his car for a long moment watching the police officers mill around Langley's apartment building. Something was very wrong here. A wrong that went beyond one suspicious death, beyond one questionable adoption. He could feel it in his bones, the same way he'd felt something was off when David disappeared. The same hollow feeling in his stomach, the same chill along his spine. As darkness fell that evening, a black SUV rolled silently into the quiet suburban street where the Whitmores lived. It came to a stop across from their house, engine cutting off but lights staying dark. Through the heavily tinted windows, the warm glow of the Whitmores' living room windows cast a gentle illumination on the street, revealing the silhouettes of the family inside. Inside the house, unaware of their observer, Rachel sat on the couch with Maya, reading her a bedtime story. The little girl's head rested against Rachel's shoulder, her eyelids growing heavy. Daniel moved through the rooms, double-checking the locks on windows and doors, his movements betraying his newfound anxiety. He paused at each window, peering out into the darkness before drawing the curtains closed. The SUV remained still, a dark sentinel in the growing night, watching and waiting, its occupant's face hidden in shadow. Sometime later, Michael Quinn sat at his desk, surrounded by stacks of yellowing police reports. His brother David's face stared back at him from a 5-year-old mugshot paperclip to the top file. The harsh fluorescent lighting made the bags under Michael's eyes more prominent as he pored over every detail of his brother's case for the 100th time. Something caught his attention. A name he hadn't focused on before. Margaret Maggie Ortega, public defender. She had been assigned to David's case in its early stages, but her name vanished from later documents. Michael quickly ran a search through the state bar directory. She was still practicing, now at a small private firm across town. Without hesitation, he grabbed his coat and car keys. 20 minutes later, he pulled up outside a modest office building in a quiet part of the city. The sign for Ortega and Associates hung slightly crooked on the brick facade. Inside, a small reception area smelled of coffee and old papers. The receptionist looked up as Michael entered. "I need to speak with Maggie Ortega," he said, showing his credentials. "It's about a case from 5 years ago." "Do you have an appointment?" "No, but it's urgent. Tell her it's about David Quinn." The receptionist disappeared through a door, returning moments later with a petite woman in her 50s. Maggie Ortega's dark hair was streaked with gray, and her eyes showed immediate recognition at Michael's face. "You look just like him," she said softly, then glanced around nervously. "Come to my office." Once inside, Maggie closed the door and drew the blinds. Her hands trembled slightly as she sat behind her desk. "I can't help you," she said before Michael could speak. "Whatever you're looking for, I can't be involved." Michael leaned forward. "My brother disappeared 5 years ago. You were his lawyer. I need to know what happened." "I said I can't help." Maggie's voice shook. "Please leave." "Ms. Ortega." Michael's tone was gentle but firm. "My 5-year-old niece is in the middle of this now. Someone killed a social worker yesterday to keep this quiet. I need answers." Color drained from Maggie's face. "They killed someone?" "Teresa Langley made it look like suicide." Maggie's hands clenched on her desk. She stood suddenly, pacing behind her chair. "I shouldn't. They made it very clear what would happen if I talked." "Who did?" She ignored the question, still pacing. "Your brother. He was doing good work. Important work. He found things they didn't want found." "About the foster system?" Maggie nodded. "He had evidence. Records of children being removed from black families under false pretenses. Documentation of bribes, falsified reports. He was building a case." "Then they framed him for armed robbery," Michael finished. "It wasn't just a frame job." Maggie's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "They needed him gone. Really gone. The robbery charge was just the beginning." She finally sat back down, her face ashen. "They took him to a place. It's not on any official records. A private holding facility for high-risk inmates. But that's not what it really is." "What is it?" "A place where people disappear." Maggie's eyes filled with tears. "The paperwork says David was released after 3 months, but he never was. No one who goes there ever comes out." Michael felt his stomach turn. "Where is this facility?" "I don't know exactly. Somewhere north of the city. That's all I could find out before." She swallowed hard. "Before they made it clear I needed to drop the case." Across town in the Whitmore home, Rachel sat on the edge of Maya's bed, gently stroking the little girl's hair. Maya had woken up screaming for the 3rd night in a row, her small body shaking with sobs. "Shh, sweetheart," Rachel soothed. "It was just a bad dream." Daniel stood in the doorway, his face creased with worry. Maya's nightmares had gotten worse since the court hearing. "The bad men," Maya whimpered, clutching her stuffed rabbit. "They took Daddy away." Rachel and Daniel exchanged concerned looks. "What bad men, sweetie?" Rachel asked carefully. "The ones in black clothes." Maya's voice was small, frightened. "They came at night. Daddy told me to hide under the bed. They hurt him." Daniel moved into the room, sitting on Maya's other side. "When did this happen, Maya?" "Long time ago. She buried her face in her rabbit. Before the other houses." Rachel felt her heart breaking. They had always been told Maya had been abandoned, that David Quinn had simply disappeared. But Maya's words painted a very different picture. Michael's phone rang as he was leaving Maggie's office. Detective Davidson's number flashed on the screen. "Davidson, I need to ask you something," Michael said without preamble. "What do you know about a private holding facility north of the city?" The line went silent for several seconds. When Davidson spoke again, his voice was tight with tension. "Where did you hear about that?" "David's former lawyer. She says that's where they took him." "Listen to me very carefully, Quinn." Davidson's voice dropped to a harsh whisper. "You need to stop looking, right now, or you'll end up in the same place." "So it exists?" I'm not having this conversation. Drop it, for your own good. The line went dead. Michael stood in the parking lot, his phone still pressed to his ear, as the implications of Davidson's warning sank in. His brother hadn't just disappeared. He had been imprisoned in a secret facility, all because he had tried to expose corruption in the foster system, the same system that had taken Maya away from him. And now, someone was willing to kill to keep that secret buried. Michael Quinn drummed his fingers on his steering wheel, Detective Davidson's warning still echoing in his mind. The morning sun cast long shadows across the parking lot of his law office as he waited. A silver sedan pulled up beside him, and a stocky man with salt and pepper hair stepped out, carrying a worn leather briefcase. Jared Wells had built his reputation exposing government corruption during his years as an investigative journalist. Now, as a private investigator, he specialized in cases others wouldn't touch. Michael had worked with him before on a handful of cases, but never anything this dangerous. "You said this was about the northern facility?" Wells asked as he slid into the passenger seat. His voice was gruff, matching his weathered appearance. Michael nodded, handing him a thick folder. "My brother disappeared there 5 years ago. I need proof it exists." Wells flipped through the documents, his expression growing darker with each page. "I've heard whispers about this place for years. Politicians, cops, judges, they all clam up when you mention it. Never had enough solid evidence to pursue it." "What have you heard?" "It's where problems go to disappear." Wells pulled out a notepad from his briefcase. "But I might know someone who can help. Terry Boone, ex-guard who worked security at a classified detention center up north. He was fired 3 years ago for drinking on the job. Can we trust him?" "He's a drunk with a grudge. Those are usually the most honest sources." Wells scribbled an address on his notepad. "He hangs out at O'Malley's bar most afternoons. Been trying to drink himself to death since he lost his job." The bar was exactly as depressing as Michael expected. Weak sunlight filtered through grimy windows, illuminating decades of cigarette smoke stains on the walls. A handful of patrons nursed their drinks in dark corners, avoiding eye contact. Terry Boone sat alone at the end of the bar, his security guard uniform replaced by a stained t-shirt and worn jeans. His hands shook slightly as he lifted his glass. "Mr. Boone?" Michael approached carefully, Wells close behind. "We'd like to talk about your former employer." Boone's bloodshot eyes darted between them. "Don't know what you're talking about." "The facility north of the city," Wells pressed. "The one that doesn't officially exist." "Get lost." Boone turned back to his drink. Michael pulled out his phone, showing Boone a photo of David. "This man was taken there 5 years ago. He's my brother. Please, I need to know what happened to him." Boone's hand trembled more violently as he stared at the photo. "I can't help you. They'll kill me." "We can protect you," Michael said. "I have connections with federal prosecutors. You help us expose this place, we'll make sure you're safe." Boone laughed bitterly. "Safe? There's no safe. They have people everywhere." He drained his glass, signaling the bartender for another. "Then what do you have to lose?" Wells asked quietly. The words seemed to hit something in Boone. He stared into his fresh drink for a long moment before speaking. "It's not a prison," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "Not really. It's where they put people who know too much. Activists, journalists, whistleblowers. Mostly black folks who started asking the wrong questions." "What about David Quinn?" Michael pressed. "Name doesn't ring a bell, but that doesn't mean anything." Boone took another drink. "Most inmates were listed as unknown detainees. No paperwork, no records. They'd just appear one day in a cell. Some disappeared after a few months, others stayed longer. Never knew what happened to the ones who disappeared." Michael felt sick. "Is it still operational?" Boone nodded. "Far as I know, they fired me for drinking, but the real reason was I started asking questions about missing inmates. Place looks abandoned from the outside, but don't let that fool you. They're still watching, still bringing people in." Across town, Rachel Whitmore retrieved the mail, sorting through bills and advertisements. An unmarked envelope caught her attention. No return address, no postmark, just their names written in block letters. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Rachel's hands shook as she read the typed message. Give up the adoption, or suffer the consequences. She ran inside, calling for Daniel. He took the letter, his face hardening as he read it. We need to call Michael, Rachel said, her voice trembling. We need to call the police, Daniel countered. And tell them what? That we're being threatened by people powerful enough to make social workers disappear? Rachel sank onto the couch. What have we gotten ourselves into, Daniel? We were trying to give a little girl a home, he said softly. We didn't know. That's just it. We didn't know. We didn't question anything. Rachel's eyes filled with tears. What if there are others? Other children taken from their families like Maya was. The sun was setting when Michael and Wells drove past the facility. From the road, it looked like any other abandoned government building. Concrete walls, chain-link fence, empty parking lot. Weeds grew through cracks in the pavement. But as they drove closer, Wells pointed to something glinting in the fading light. Security cameras. New ones. Michael squinted through the windshield. The cameras were small, almost invisible unless you knew what to look for. They rotated slowly, scanning the perimeter. Someone's still watching, Wells muttered. As if to confirm his words, one of the cameras swiveled toward their car, its red light blinking steadily in the growing darkness. The midnight air hung heavy with tension as Michael and Wells crouched behind their parked car, a quarter-mile from the facility's main gate. The moon cast enough light to see by, but shadows still clung to the corners of the concrete building like dark secrets refusing to be revealed. Security rotation starts at midnight sharp, Wells whispered, checking his watch. We'll have a 3-minute window when the cameras reset during the shift change. Michael nodded, his heart pounding against his ribs, the weight of his brother's photo pressed against his chest from inside his jacket pocket. And you're sure about the back entrance? Maintenance door, northwest corner. Electronic keypad. Wells pulled out a small device from his bag. This'll override it. Used to work on similar systems when I was investigating prison conditions upstate. They watched as a white security van pulled up to the main gate. 2 guards stepped out, replacing the ones ending their shift. The cameras above them pivoted, then froze. Now, Wells hissed. They moved swiftly through the darkness, keeping low. The maintenance door stood partially hidden behind an overgrown hedge. Wells attached his device to the keypad while Michael kept watch. After what felt like an eternity, the lock clicked. Inside, emergency lights cast a sickly green glow through empty corridors. Their footsteps, despite their care, seemed to echo off the concrete walls. The air smelled of bleach and something else, something older and more sinister. Records room should be this way, Wells muttered, consulting a rough layout he'd sketched based on Boone's description. 2nd floor, east wing. They climbed stairs carefully, freezing at every creak and groan of the building. The records room's door stood partially open, as if someone had left in a hurry. Inside, metal filing cabinets lined the walls, their surfaces dusty except for recent fingerprints. Someone's been here recently, Michael observed, running his finger through the dust. Let's work fast. Wells pulled out a small flashlight and began examining cabinet labels. Michael started with the nearest cabinet, pulling drawers open carefully to minimize noise. Most contained standard prisoner intake forms, but many had names and dates clearly erased or redacted. Then, in a drawer marked 2018, he found it. A log entry from the exact date David disappeared. Wells, he whispered urgently, look at this. The entry was mostly blank, but the timestamp matched perfectly. Under prisoner classification, someone had written priority containment before attempting to scratch it out. They continued searching, moving to a row of lockers along the back wall. Most were empty, but one caught Michael's attention. Unlike the others, it had a modern padlock, recently placed. Wells made quick work of the lock with a set of picks. Inside, folded carefully, was a prison jumpsuit. Dark stains marred the fabric, and when Michael lifted it, his hands trembled. There, on the collar, barely visible, were the letters D. Quinn. This is it, Michael breathed. This proves he was here. Wells was already examining a shelf of hard drives likely containing CCTV footage. These could show exactly what happened to him. The sound of footsteps in the hallway froze them both. "Quick," Wells mouthed, gesturing to a large storage cabinet. They squeezed inside just as two men entered the room. Through a small gap, Michael could see them clearly. Expensive suits, government haircuts, moving with the confidence of people used to power. "Check everything," the taller one ordered. "We need to be thorough." The other man began rifling through the same cabinet Michael had searched. "Sir, the log from 2018. Someone's been here." "Damn it." The first man slammed his hand against a filing cabinet. "Make sure nothing leads back to the program. If Quinn's alive, we need to end this now." Michael's blood ran cold. The way they said Quinn, they weren't talking about him. They were talking about David. The men continued their search, moving methodically through the room. They were getting closer to the storage cabinet. Michael could feel Wells tensing beside him, ready for a fight if they were discovered. Just then a radio crackled. "Sir, we've got movement at the south entrance, multiple signatures." "Check it out," the leader ordered. "We'll finish here." The men left quickly, their footsteps fading down the hallway. Michael and Wells waited several agonizing minutes before emerging. "We need to move," Wells said, stuffing the jumpsuit and several hard drives into his bag. "They'll be back." They retraced their steps through the facility, every shadow now seeming to hide a potential threat. The maintenance door was still unlocked, their escape route clear. Outside, they ran to their car, adrenaline masking the sound of their heavy breathing. Wells threw the car into drive before Michael had fully closed his door. As they pulled onto the main road, Michael glanced in the side mirror. Headlights appeared behind them, growing larger. "We've got company," he said grimly. Wells pressed the accelerator harder, but the headlights kept pace. "Hold on tight. This is about to get interesting." The black SUV's headlights blazed in the rearview mirror, growing larger with each passing second. Wells gripped the steering wheel tighter, his knuckles white as he pushed the car to its limits. The dark highway stretched before them, empty except for their two vehicles racing through the night. "They're gaining on us," Michael said, watching the SUV through the side mirror. He recognized it immediately, the same vehicle that had been watching the Whitmore house. Wells jerked the wheel sharply, taking a sudden turn onto a narrow side road. The tires screeched against the asphalt, and Michael braced himself against the dashboard. The SUV followed, its engine roaring as it made the same turn. "They're closing in," Wells shouted, weaving the car back and forth to make them a harder target. Michael pulled out his phone with shaking hands, scrolling quickly to Detective Davidson's number. The call connected after 2 rings. "Davidson," Michael spoke urgently. "We need help. We're being—" The sharp crack of gunfire cut through the night. The back window exploded inward, showering them with glass. Wells ducked instinctively, and the car swerved dangerously close to the guardrail. Another shot rang out. This time, the bullet punched through the windshield, creating a spider web of cracks that made it nearly impossible to see. Glass fragments rained down on them as Wells struggled to keep control of the vehicle. "Get down!" Wells yelled, making another sharp turn into what looked like an abandoned industrial zone. Old warehouses loomed on either side, their dark shapes creating a maze of shadows and blind corners. Michael's phone had fallen during the chaos. He could hear Davidson's voice calling out from somewhere on the floor, but there was no time to retrieve it. The SUV was still behind them, its headlights cutting through the shattered rear window. Wells navigated through the narrow streets between warehouses, taking random turns in an attempt to lose their pursuers. The car's engine protested as he pushed it harder, the smell of burning rubber filling the air as they took corners at dangerous speeds. Finally, after what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, the headlights behind them disappeared. Wells didn't slow down, taking several more turns before killing the lights and pulling behind a massive storage container. "We can't stay in the car," he whispered, shutting off the engine. "They'll be looking for it." Michael nodded, grabbing his bag containing the hard drives and the blood-stained jumpsuit. They slipped out of the car quietly, staying low as they moved toward the nearest warehouse. The lock on a side door was already broken, and they slipped inside without a sound. The warehouse was vast and empty, save for some abandoned machinery and scattered debris. Moonlight filtered through dirty skylights, casting long shadows across the concrete floor. They found a spot behind some old crates hidden from view of the windows and doors. "We need to wait until sunrise," Wells said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Moving now would make us too visible." Michael pulled out the hard drives from his bag, examining them in the dim light. They were standard security system drives, but they might contain the evidence he needed. Proof of what happened to David. Proof of the facility's illegal operations. Proof of everything. Hours passed slowly. Every distant sound made them tense, expecting their pursuers to burst through the doors at any moment. But gradually, the sky began to lighten, turning from black to deep blue to the soft gray of dawn. When the first rays of sunlight streamed through the skylights, Wells carefully checked the area around the warehouse. "Coast looks clear," he reported, "but we can't go back to the car. They'll be watching it." Michael agreed. They left the warehouse cautiously, staying in the shadows of buildings as they made their way out of the industrial zone. Wells knew someone who owed him a favor, a mechanic who asked no questions and could give them a ride back to the city. 2 hours later, they were in Michael's office. He had chosen this location carefully. The building had security cameras and required key card access after hours. It wasn't perfect, but it was safer than most places. Wells connected the hard drives to a secure computer, one that wasn't linked to any network. Lines of code filled the screen as he attempted to access the files. "It's encrypted," he said, frowning at the monitor. "Professional job, too. This isn't standard security system protection. Someone really wanted to keep these files hidden." "How long to break through?" Michael asked, watching the strings of characters scroll past. "Could be days, maybe longer. We might need help with this." Michael's phone buzzed. A voicemail notification. He had missed several calls while they were hiding, most from unknown numbers, but this one was from Rachel Whitmore. He played the message, and Rachel's frightened voice filled the room. "Michael, someone broke into our house last night. They took Maya's files. We're scared." Michael's hand tightened around the phone. The people behind this weren't just covering their tracks anymore. They were sending a message, and they were willing to threaten a child to keep their secrets buried. Meanwhile, in a cramped apartment on the city's east side, the blue glow of multiple computer screens cast eerie shadows across the walls. Sean Patel hunched over his keyboard, his fingers flying across the keys with practiced precision. Empty energy drink cans littered his desk, testament to the hours they'd already spent trying to crack the facility's security footage. The air in the room felt thick with tension, and the faint smell of stale coffee. Michael paced behind him, unable to sit still. Every minute felt like an eternity, knowing that somewhere out there, people were trying to silence anyone who got too close to the truth. His heart hammered in his chest as he checked his watch for the 5th time in as many minutes. "This encryption is serious business," Sean muttered, pushing his glasses up his nose. "Military grade. Whoever did this didn't want anyone seeing what's on these drives. It's like trying to break into Fort Knox with a plastic spoon." "Can you break it?" Michael asked, stopping his pacing to lean over Sean's shoulder, his breath catching in his throat. Already working through the 3rd layer. Sean's eyes never left the screen as lines of code scrolled past, reflecting in his glasses. "But there's something else here. Some kind of failsafe. If we're not careful, it could trigger and wipe everything. One wrong move and we lose it all." Michael checked his phone again. No new messages from Rachel and Daniel, which he hoped meant they were safe. After the break-in at their house, he'd arranged for private security to watch their home, but it didn't feel like enough. The thought of Maya being in danger made his stomach twist into knots. Hours crawled by. Sean worked methodically, occasionally muttering to himself as he encountered new security measures. Michael alternated between pacing and staring at the screens, trying to make sense of the technical jargon that flashed across them. He rubbed his tired eyes, fighting against the fatigue that threatened to overwhelm him. Finally, just as the sun was beginning to set, painting the room with golden hues, Sean straightened in his chair. "Got it," he exclaimed, his tired face breaking into a grin. "The encryption's cracked. We should have access to all the video files now. They tried to hide it, but they didn't count on me." Michael rushed to the computer as Sean began opening files. The footage was grainy but clear enough to make out faces and movements. They scrolled through days of security camera feeds until something caught Michael's eye. A flash of familiar movement that made his heart stop. "Stop," he said sharply. "Go back." Sean reversed the footage. There, in black and white, was David Quinn being dragged through a corridor by two men in tactical gear. David's face was bruised, his clothes torn. He was struggling, his mouth moving as he shouted something the silent footage couldn't capture. Michael felt a rage building inside him at the sight of his brother being treated like a criminal. "Can you enhance the audio?" Michael asked, his voice tight with anger, fingers digging into the back of Sean's chair. Sean worked his magic on the computer, fingers dancing across the keyboard, and suddenly David's voice filled the room. "Please, my daughter. She needs me. Maya needs me." The raw desperation in his brother's voice cut through Michael like a knife. Michael's hands clenched into fists as he watched his brother being manhandled into a cell. The timestamp showed this was just days after David's supposed release from prison. The betrayal was worse than he'd imagined. "There's more," Sean said, opening another file. This one showed a different area of the facility, what looked like an office. Teresa Langley sat across from a well-dressed man, their conversation now clearly audible through Sean's enhanced audio. The room was tastefully decorated, a stark contrast to the prison cells they'd just witnessed. "The father has been contained," Langley was saying, shuffling through some papers with an air of casual efficiency. "We've already arranged for the child to be placed with the Whitmores. They're perfect, wealthy, white, politically connected. No one will question it. The paperwork is seamless." The man nodded approvingly. "And the documentation? All taken care of. As far as anyone knows, David Quinn abandoned his daughter. The adoption is already set up. No one will ever know she was taken." She smiled, pleased with herself, as though discussing nothing more serious than a business transaction. Michael felt sick, a cold sweat breaking out across his forehead. Here was the proof. His brother hadn't abandoned Maya. He'd been forcibly taken, imprisoned in an illegal facility, while his daughter was stolen from him and given to another family. The injustice of it all made him want to put his fist through the wall. "We need to make copies," Michael said, his voice shaking with barely controlled rage. "Multiple copies, stored in different locations. These people have already killed to keep this quiet. We can't risk losing this evidence." Sean nodded, his fingers already moving across the keyboard. "I'm creating encrypted backups now. But what are you going to do with this? These are powerful people we're dealing with." Michael pulled out his phone and dialed Judge Monroe's number. While it rang, he watched Sean transfer a copy of the footage to a secure server, the progress bar slowly filling across the screen. "Send everything to this email address," he told Sean, writing down Judge Monroe's contact information. "She needs to see this immediately. She's the only judge I trust with something this big." Within minutes, the footage was on its way to the judge. Michael waited anxiously, pacing the small apartment, knowing this evidence could blow the whole conspiracy wide open. An hour later, his phone rang, the sound cutting through the tense silence. "Michael," Judge Monroe's voice was urgent. "I've seen the footage. This is bigger than just your brother. This is systemic. And we just found a name linked to it all. This goes higher than we thought." Michael's phone buzzed with an incoming message from the judge. His hands trembled slightly as he opened it to find a single name: Senator Charles Beckett. The name hit him like a physical blow. One of the most powerful men in the state was behind his brother's suffering. Later, Michael sat in his dimly lit office, his computer screen casting a harsh glow across his face as he delved deeper into Senator Charles Beckett's history. News articles, campaign speeches, and policy documents filled his screen, all painting a picture of a champion for children's rights and foster care reform. But now, looking at it through the lens of what he knew, Michael saw the sinister truth behind the carefully crafted public image. Beckett's signature legislation, the Child Protection and Placement Act, had given unprecedented power to private adoption agencies. The senator had claimed it would streamline the adoption process and protect vulnerable children. Instead, it had created a pipeline for stealing Black children from their families. Michael pulled up the statistics. Since Beckett's law passed, there had been a dramatic increase in black children being removed from their homes and placed with wealthy white families. The official reasoning always seemed legitimate on paper: neglect, unsafe conditions, or abandonment. But now Michael understood these were fabricated charges, part of a systematic operation to separate families. His hands trembled as he opened another document, a list of private adoption agencies directly connected to Beckett. All of them had received massive state funding under his legislation. All of them had been involved in cases similar to Maya's. The pieces were falling into pieces. Beckett wasn't just participating in the corruption, he was orchestrating it. The senator had created a perfect system: use state power to target black parents who might expose the truth, disappear them in unofficial holding facilities, then erase their parental rights and sell their children to wealthy families willing to pay top dollar for quick, quiet adoptions. David Quinn had been investigating this very system when he vanished. He'd been getting too close to exposing Beckett's operation, so they'd framed him, imprisoned him, and stolen his daughter. Michael's computer pinged with a new email alert. It was from an anonymous source. More files, more evidence. Records showed hundreds of cases following the same pattern. Black parents suddenly arrested on suspicious charges. Children quickly placed in adoption proceedings. All paperwork expedited through Beckett's network of corrupt officials. The scope of it made Michael's head spin. This wasn't just about Maya and David anymore. This was about hundreds of families torn apart, hundreds of children stolen, all to feed Beckett's profitable adoption pipeline. With shaking hands, Michael gathered all the evidence he'd collected and drove to meet Detective Davidson at a quiet diner on the outskirts of town. The detective was already there, sitting in a corner booth, looking nervously over his shoulder. "What you're about to see," Michael said, placing a laptop on the table, "goes all the way to the top." He played the security footage from the facility, showed Davidson the documents linking Beckett to the corrupt adoption network, and laid out the pattern of disappeared parents and stolen children. Davidson's face grew increasingly pale as he watched. "This is bigger than anything I've seen," he whispered, running a hand through his graying hair. "If what you're showing me is true." "It is true," Michael insisted. "And we have proof, real, solid evidence that can't be ignored." After a long moment, Davidson nodded. "I'll launch an official investigation. This needs to be done by the book. We can't give them any reason to dismiss it." Michael felt a surge of hope for the first time in days. Finally, someone with authority was willing to help expose the truth. But that hope was short-lived. Just 3 hours later, his phone rang. Davidson's voice was shaking. "They buried it," the detective said, his words coming out in a rush. "The state prosecutor just classified all your evidence as part of an ongoing national security investigation. I've been ordered to stand down. They're watching us, Michael. Beckett's people, they're everywhere." Michael could hear the fear in Davidson's voice. "What about the footage? The documents?" "Gone. They seized everything." And Michael ... Davidson's voice dropped to a whisper. "They knew exactly what we had. Someone's monitoring all of us." Before Michael could respond, his phone buzzed with an incoming message. His heart stopped when he opened it. It was a video feed, live footage showing Maya playing in the Whitmore's backyard. She was wearing her favorite purple dress, chasing butterflies through Rachel's garden. The camera angle suggested someone was watching from just beyond the fence. Then the feed cut out, replaced by a black screen. A distorted voice crackled through his phone's speaker. "Stop now, or she disappears too." Michael's hand tightened around his phone, his knuckles turning white. The threat was clear. If he continued investigating, Maya would suffer the same fate as her father, the same fate as all the other families Beckett had destroyed. Cold sweat beaded on his forehead as he watched the video replay, showing Maya's innocent play turned into a terrifying warning. These people had already proven they were willing to kill to keep their secret. They'd already destroyed countless families, and now they were threatening to do it again. The message vanished as quickly as it had appeared, leaving Michael staring at his blank phone screen, his heart pounding in his chest. They weren't just watching him. They were watching Maya, Rachel, and Daniel. Everyone he cared about was now a target. The weight of the situation crashed down on him. He had the truth about Beckett's operation, about what happened to David, about the hundreds of other families torn apart by this corrupt system. But exposing it meant putting Maya at risk. The same people who had made his brother disappear were now threatening to do the same to his niece. Michael sat frozen in his office chair, the threat echoing in his mind. The corruption went deeper than he'd imagined, reaching into every level of law enforcement and government. Even Davidson, one of the few honest cops he knew, had been silenced. They had eyes everywhere, power everywhere, and they'd just proven they could get to Maya at any time. The live video feed had been a message carefully calculated to hit him where it hurt most. They knew exactly how to make him back down, by threatening the very person he was fighting to protect. Days later, the morning sun had barely risen when Rachel Whitmore's screams shattered the quiet suburban street. She stood in Maya's doorway, her hands trembling as they gripped the empty doorframe. The pink sheets on Maya's bed were rumpled, her stuffed rabbit lying forgotten on the floor. Daniel rushed up behind her, his face draining of color as he took in the empty room. "Maya?" he called out, his voice cracking. "Maya, honey, where are you?" But they both knew. The front door stood wide open, the morning breeze gently moving the curtains. Their security system hadn't made a sound all night. Their daughter was gone. Rachel's hands shook as she dialed Michael's number. The phone rang 3 times before he answered, his voice groggy from sleep. "She's gone." Rachel's words came out in hysterical gasps. "Maya is gone. Someone took her." Michael felt his world tilt on its axis. The phone nearly slipped from his suddenly numb fingers as Rachel's words registered. He was already moving, grabbing his keys and jacket, running down the stairs of his apartment building 2 at a time. "I'm on my way," he said, his voice tight with controlled panic. "Call the police. I'm calling Detective Davidson right now." He ended the call and immediately dialed Davidson's number as he jumped into his car. The engine roared to life, and he pulled out onto the street, breaking every speed limit between his apartment and the Whitmore's house. Davidson answered on the first ring. "Quinn? What's wrong?" "They took her." Michael's voice was raw with fear and rage. "They took Maya from the Whitmore's house. Get every available unit to 1247 Oak Street. Now." By the time Michael screeched to a halt in front of the Whitmore's house, 3 police cars were already there, their lights painting the morning sky in alternating red and blue. Rachel sat on the front steps, wrapped in a blanket despite the warm morning, her face buried in her hands. Daniel paced the front lawn, talking rapidly to a uniformed officer. Detective Davidson's unmarked car pulled up just as Michael was rushing toward the house. The detective looked grim as he joined Michael on the front walk. "We're pulling security footage from every camera in the neighborhood," Davidson said, his voice low. "And I've got an Amber Alert going out within the next 5 minutes." Inside the house, crime scene technicians were dusting for prints, but Michael already knew they wouldn't find any. These weren't amateur kidnappers. This was Beckett's work. This was punishment for getting too close to the truth. An hour later, they gathered in the Whitmore's living room to review the security footage collected from neighboring houses. The timestamp read 2:13 a.m. when a black SUV with tinted windows and no license plates pulled up to the curb. 2 men in dark clothing and masks emerged, moving with military precision toward the house. Michael's fists clenched as he watched them somehow bypass the security system and enter through the front door. 8 minutes later, they emerged carrying Maya, wrapped in her favorite purple blanket. She appeared to be unconscious. Rachel let out a choked sob as she watched the footage. Daniel wrapped his arms around her, his own face ashen. "How did they get past the alarm system?" Daniel asked, his voice hoarse. "We armed it last night, like we always do." Davidson shook his head. They had professional equipment. This wasn't random. This was planned. Michael's phone buzzed in his pocket. A new message from an unknown number. "Walk away, or she's lost forever." His jaw clenched as he showed the message to Davidson. The detective's face darkened. "Beckett," Michael said, his voice barely containing his rage. "This has his fingerprints all over it. The professional crew, the disabled security system. The untraceable vehicle. This is how he operates. We can't prove that, Davidson warned, but his eyes said he believed it too. He's trying to force me to back off, Michael continued, standing up and pacing the room. He knows I'm close to exposing everything. The corrupt adoption network, the disappeared parents, all of it. So he's using Maya as leverage. Rachel looked up, her eyes red from crying. What are you talking about? What adoption network? Michael stopped pacing, looking at Rachel and Daniel's confused faces. He hadn't told them everything yet, trying to protect them. But now they needed to know. Senator Beckett runs a corrupt adoption pipeline, he explained, his voice tight with controlled anger. He uses state power to target black families, fabricate charges against the parents, and then places their children with wealthy white families through his private adoption agencies. That's what happened to Maya and my brother David. That's what's happened to hundreds of other families. Daniel shook his head, struggling to process this information. But we went through a legitimate agency. We passed all the background checks, did everything by the book. The whole book is corrupt, Michael said softly. Beckett's people are everywhere. In the agencies, in law enforcement, in the courts. They made everything look legitimate while stealing children from their families. Rachel's face had gone pale. Oh God, she whispered. We didn't know. We thought we were helping her. You were victims too, Michael assured them. They used your good intentions to hide their crimes. His phone buzzed again, another message. This one contained a photo of Maya, sleeping on what looked like a cot in a bare room. The message below read, Last chance. Walk away now. Michael stared at the photo, feeling something shift inside him. They'd taken his brother. They'd stolen his niece. They'd destroyed countless families, and now they thought they could threaten him into silence. He looked up at Davidson, his decision made. He wouldn't play defense anymore. He wouldn't back down or wait for them to make the next move. It was time to take the fight directly to Beckett. The senator had built his power on secrets and shadows, using fear to keep people quiet. But Michael wasn't afraid anymore. He was angry, and he was going to use that anger to tear Beckett's whole corrupt system down. Michael Quinn sat in his dimly lit office, the morning sun barely filtering through the Venetian blinds. His knuckles were white as he gripped his phone, staring at the threatening message that glowed on the screen. Walk away, or she's lost forever. Rachel and Daniel Whitmore huddled together on the leather couch across from his desk, their faces drawn with exhaustion and fear. They hadn't slept since Maya's kidnapping, and it showed in their red-rimmed eyes and trembling hands. The phone vibrated again, making them all jump. A video file notification appeared. Michael's finger hovered over the play button as he looked at Rachel and Daniel. Are you sure you want to watch this? Rachel nodded, gripping Daniel's hand tighter. We need to see her. Michael pressed play. The video showed a sparse room with concrete walls, lit by a single overhead bulb. Maya sat on a metal folding chair, her purple blanket wrapped around her shoulders. Her dark curls were messy and her eyes were wide with fear, but she appeared unharmed. She clutched her stuffed rabbit. They must have let her keep it when they took her. Say hello to your uncle, Maya, a distorted voice commanded from off-screen. Maya's lower lip trembled. Uncle Michael? I want to go home. Rachel let out a choked sob and Daniel pulled her closer. The camera shifted, showing only a black mask against the concrete wall. You have 48 hours, the distorted voice said. Drop everything. If you go to the police, she disappears forever. The video ended, plunging the office into silence, broken only by Rachel's quiet crying. Michael set the phone down carefully, his movements controlled despite the rage burning in his chest. He turned to the Whitmores, his expression hard with determination. They took the wrong child, he said, his voice steady and certain. I'm getting her back. He picked up his office phone and dialed Jared Wells, putting it on speaker. The private investigator answered on the second ring. Wells, I need you here now. Bring Sean Patel. The hacker? What's going on? Maya's been kidnapped. I have a video that needs tracing. There was a brief pause. On my way, 20 minutes. While they waited, Michael's personal phone buzzed with a text from Detective Davidson. Off the record. Check property records for shell company Blue Ridge Holdings. Connected to B. Michael quickly wrote down the information. When Wells arrived with Sean Patel, the young hacker immediately set up his laptop and began working on tracing the video's origin. The video file has been bounced through multiple servers, Sean explained, his fingers flying over the keyboard. But there's always a trail if you know where to look. Wells leaned over Michael's desk, examining the property records Michael had pulled up. Blue Ridge Holdings, he muttered. They own 6 properties in the state, but only one matches the concrete walls from the video, an old storage facility outside the city. He pulled up satellite imagery on his tablet. Look at this, he said, zooming in on a particular building. Security cameras, reinforced gates, and regular vehicle activity despite being listed as abandoned on paper. Can you get surveillance footage from the area? Michael asked. Wells nodded, already working on his phone. I have a contact who monitors traffic cams in that sector. Give me an hour. The hour crawled by. Rachel and Daniel dozed fitfully on the couch while Michael paced, checking his phone every few minutes. Finally, Wells's tablet pinged with an incoming file. Got it, he said, pulling up the footage. This is from early this morning, about an hour after Maya was taken. They watched as a black SUV with tinted windows, identical to the one from the neighborhood footage, turned onto the access road leading to the storage facility. The timestamp matched. That's them, Michael said, his voice tight. That's where they're keeping her. He walked to his desk drawer and pulled out a small key. The drawer contained a handgun and a spare clip, a precaution he'd never thought he'd need to use. Michael, Rachel said softly, fully awake now. What are you going to do? Before he could answer, his phone buzzed again. Another video message. This time Maya was crying, her small shoulders shaking as she hugged her stuffed rabbit. The masked figure didn't appear, but the distorted voice spoke. She's running out of time, Uncle Michael. Tick-tock. Michael tucked the gun into his shoulder holster and pulled on his jacket. His face was set with grim determination as he looked at the people gathered in his office, the Whitmores, Wells, and Sean. They were all watching him, waiting to see what he would do. I'm getting her back, he said simply, and then I'm taking Beckett down. The moon hung low in the sky as Michael Quinn and his small team crouched behind a line of dense bushes, studying the storage facility's perimeter. Jared Wells adjusted his night vision goggles, the green glow illuminating his determined face, while the 2 ex-military operatives, Marcus Chen and Tom Rodriguez, checked their tactical gear one final time, their movements precise and practiced. The facility rose before them like a fortress, its concrete walls stretching high into the darkness, casting long shadows across the empty lot. Floodlights swept across the grounds in steady patterns, cutting through the night like searching fingers while armed guards patrolled at regular intervals, their boots crunching on gravel. This was no makeshift hideout. It was a professional operation, funded and organized with frightening efficiency. 4 guards on rotation, Marcus whispered, his trained eye scanning the compound. 2 at the main gate, 2 walking the perimeter. Camera coverage is extensive. They've got blind spots, but they're minimal. Michael watched as a guard passed nearby, his security badge catching the light. The logo made his blood run cold, a blue shield with a twisted tree inside. He'd seen it before, in the footage from the underground facility where David had been held. The connection was undeniable. That badge, he muttered to Wells. It's the same organization. They're not even trying to hide it. Wells nodded grimly. This isn't just about Maya. They've been doing this for years, probably hundreds of kids. Tom's voice crackled through their earpieces. Sean's ready on the tech side. Say the word and we're ghosts in their system. Michael checked his watch. 11:42 p.m. The night shift would be settling in, guards getting comfortable and less alert. Coffee cups would be full, attention spans waning. It was time. Sean, Michael whispered into his comm, start the sequence. Make us invisible. From his remote location, Sean Patel's fingers flew across his keyboard, dancing over keys with expert precision. One by one, the facility's security cameras began to loop old footage, showing empty corridors instead of intruders. The electronic locks on the side entrance clicked softly as their codes were overridden, surrendering to Sean's digital touch. Michael gave the signal and the team moved forward in perfect synchronization, like shadows given purpose. They slipped through the darkness, avoiding the sweeping floodlights with practiced timing, and reached the side door without detection. Tom made quick work of the lock, his fingers steady despite the tension, and they entered the facility's dark interior. The hallways were eerily quiet, their footsteps muffled by industrial carpeting. The air smelled of disinfectant and fear, a sterile mask covering something deeply wrong. As they turned a corner, Michael froze. Through an open door, he saw a room filled with empty cribs, each one meticulously made with hospital corners, waiting for new occupants. "My God," Wells breathed, his voice barely audible. "How many children have they taken?" "This is a processing center." Michael's jaw clenched, a muscle twitching beneath his skin. This wasn't just a criminal enterprise, it was systematic evil, destroying families with clinical efficiency, separating children from parents with cold calculation. They continued deeper into the facility, following the blueprint Sean had obtained through channels better left unmentioned. According to their intel, Maya was being held in the East Wing, temporarily housed before being moved again. As they approached the corridor, voices echoed from around the corner, bouncing off the sterile walls. "The girl keeps asking for her uncle," a gruff voice said, tinged with annoyance. "Should we sedate her?" "She won't stop crying." "No," another voice replied, sharper and more authoritative. "Boss wants her awake, says we might need her that way. Just keep her quiet." Michael's hands curled into fists as a guard appeared, roughly pulling Maya along by her arm. She stumbled, her small legs struggling to keep pace, clutching her stuffed rabbit like a lifeline, tears streaming down her face. The sight of her fear made something snap inside Michael, a protective rage he'd never felt before. Before Wells could stop him, Michael moved. Years of boxing training took over as he dropped the first guard with a precise strike to the throat, silent and devastating. The second guard reached for his weapon, eyes widening in shock, but Michael was faster, driving his elbow into the man's solar plexus with enough force to drop him to his knees. Maya stood frozen, her eyes wide with recognition, hope breaking through her terror. "Uncle Michael," she whispered, her voice small and disbelieving. He reached for her, his heart pounding against his ribs. "I'm here, sweetheart. I'm taking you home. Your daddy's waiting." The click of a safety being released stopped him cold, the sound echoing in the corridor. Behind him, a familiar voice spoke with cultured amusement, smooth as expensive whiskey. "I was hoping you'd come. You're so predictable when it comes to family." Michael turned slowly. Senator Charles Beckett stood in the doorway, his expensive suit incongruous in the stark facility, not a wrinkle to be seen. He held a pistol with the casual confidence of someone used to power, someone who rarely needed to dirty his own hands. Behind him, 4 more armed men filed into the hallway, their weapons trained on Michael, faces impassive. Maya whimpered, pressing herself against the wall, clutching her rabbit tighter. Michael stayed perfectly still, his mind racing through options, calculating odds, searching for an escape. Beckett's smile was cold and satisfied, never reaching his eyes. "You know, Mr. Quinn, you've caused me quite a bit of trouble. Just like your brother did. Stubbornness must run in the family." "Where is he?" Michael demanded, voice steady despite the gun aimed at his chest. "What did you do to David?" "You think this is about one little girl?" Beckett laughed, gesturing at Maya with his free hand. "You have no idea what you're dealing with. This is bigger than you can imagine." Michael saw the slight shift in Beckett's stance, the subtle tightening of his finger on the trigger, the almost imperceptible narrowing of his eyes. He lunged forward just as the gunshot rang out, the sound deafening in the confined space. The gunshot echoed through the hallway as Michael dove forward, tackling Maya to protect her with his body. The bullet whizzed past, embedding itself in the wall behind them. Before Beckett could fire again, the facility erupted into chaos. Wells and the tactical team burst through the adjacent corridor, their coordinated assault catching Beckett's men off guard. The sound of gunfire filled the narrow space as bullets ricocheted off concrete walls. Michael kept Maya pressed against the floor, shielding her with his body as she trembled beneath him. "Keep your eyes closed, sweetheart," he whispered, holding her close. "Just hold onto your rabbit tight." Through the chaos, Michael heard Beckett curse and retreat, his expensive shoes clicking against the floor as he fled. But Michael couldn't pursue him. Maya's safety came first. Wells and his team moved with military precision, neutralizing Beckett's security forces one by one. "Clear!" Marcus shouted from one end of the hallway. "Clear!" Tom echoed from the other. Michael scooped Maya into his arms, her small body clinging to him like a lifeline. "Wells, we need an exit now." "This way." Wells gestured toward the emergency stairwell. "Sean's disabled the alarms." As they rushed past an office, Michael spotted a heavy-duty file cabinet through the open door. Something about it caught his eye, a familiar logo matching the security badges. Making a split-second decision, he handed Maya to Wells. "Take her, I need 30 seconds." Wells hesitated for just a moment before nodding, securing Maya in his arms. Michael darted into the office, his heart pounding. The cabinet was locked, but Michael didn't waste time with finesse. He grabbed a letter opener from the desk and jammed it into the lock, forcing it with all his strength. The metal groaned, then gave way. Inside, rows of manila folders filled the drawers, along with a USB drive taped to the inside of the top drawer. Michael didn't have time to be selective. He grabbed everything, stuffing the files and drive into his jacket. "Michael, we need to move," Wells called out. "Police are incoming." Michael sprinted back to the group. Maya reached for him immediately, and he took her from Wells, holding her close as they descended the stairs. The sound of approaching sirens pierced the night air as they burst through the emergency exit into the cool darkness. Their vehicles were waiting exactly where they'd left them, engines running. Michael climbed into the back of an unmarked SUV with Maya, while Wells took the wheel. Marcus and Tom split up into separate vehicles to divide any potential pursuit. As they pulled away from the facility, red and blue lights began flooding the area behind them. Maya didn't speak during the drive, but her grip on Michael never loosened. He stroked her hair gently, whispering reassurances as Wells navigated through back roads and side streets, ensuring they weren't followed. 30 minutes later, they arrived at the Safe House, a modest cabin on the outskirts of town that Wells maintained for operations like this. Inside, Michael finally set Maya down on a worn but comfortable couch, wrapping her in a blanket as she clutched her rabbit. "You're safe now," he promised, kissing her forehead. "No one's going to take you away again." While Wells made Maya some hot chocolate and kept watch, Michael spread the stolen files across the kitchen table. As he began reading, his hands started to shake. The documents revealed a program more extensive and horrifying than he'd imagined. Detailed spreadsheets tracked thousands of children, all from Black families, who had been systematically removed from their parents through manufactured circumstances. False police reports, fabricated evidence, and staged incidents, all meticulously documented. One file contained a list of target criteria for selecting families: single parents, working-class neighborhoods, families who might lack resources to fight back legally. Another detailed the network of corrupt officials who helped facilitate the removals. Judges, social workers, police officers, all paid handsomely for their cooperation. Financial records showed millions in government funding being funneled through legitimate-looking adoption agencies, with significant portions disappearing into offshore accounts belonging to politicians and law enforcement officials. The program had been operating for over 2 decades, destroying countless families under the guise of child welfare. Michael found David's file. His brother's arrest had been planned weeks in advance after David started asking questions about missing children in their neighborhood. The robbery charge was completely fabricated, backed by false witness statements and planted evidence. The USB drive contained even more damning evidence: emails between Beckett and other politicians discussing the program in coded language, referring to it as urban family restructuring. They spoke of demographic adjustment and cultural integration, genocide dressed up in bureaucratic terms. Michael's hands were shaking with rage as he carefully scanned every document, uploading them to a secure cloud drive that Sean had set up. This wasn't just about Maya or David anymore. This was about thousands of families torn apart, lives destroyed, all to feed a system of institutional racism disguised as child protection. Once everything was backed up, Michael picked up his phone and dialed Judge Monroe's number. Despite the late hour, she answered on the second ring. "We have everything," Michael said, his voice tight with controlled fury. "The whole operation, documented. Names, dates, financial records, all of it. It's time to take them down." The documents spread before him told a story of calculated cruelty, of families shattered by design, of a system built to erase not just parents' rights, but entire family lines. But now, finally, they had the proof needed to expose it all. Maya had fallen asleep on the couch, her rabbit tucked under her chin. Looking at her, Michael thought of all the other children out there, separated from their families by Beckett's machinery of corruption. They would all get justice now. Every last one of them. Judge Monroe wasted no time. Within hours of receiving Michael's evidence, she initiated emergency proceedings, her voice carrying authority as she contacted federal authorities and fellow judges. By morning, the wheels of justice were turning at unprecedented speed. The federal courthouse buzzed with activity as news crews gathered outside, their cameras trained on the entrance. Reporters huddled in small groups, whispering excitedly about rumors of a major scandal. Inside, Judge Monroe sat at the bench, her expression stern as she reviewed the mountain of evidence before her. The stolen files, now properly cataloged and verified, painted a devastating picture of systematic corruption that stretched back decades. "This court hereby orders Senator Charles Beckett to appear before this tribunal," she announced, her voice echoing through the packed courtroom. She paused, making eye contact with several key officials. "The evidence presented demonstrates a clear pattern of criminal conspiracy, child trafficking, and civil rights violations on an unprecedented scale." Michael sat in the front row watching as federal marshals distributed subpoenas. His heart pounded with a mixture of vindication and anger. The evidence was damning. Detailed records of forced removals, falsified documents, and financial trails leading directly to Beckett's private accounts. Years of meticulous planning had created a paper trail that couldn't be denied. The senator's carefully constructed facade was crumbling like a house of cards. Within hours, major news networks broke the story. Headlines flashed across screens nationwide. "Massive foster care corruption scandal exposed." Senator Beckett implicated in systematic removal of Black children. Decades of forced adoptions uncovered. Social media exploded with outrage as people shared their own stories of encounters with the system. But Beckett was already gone. His office released a statement claiming he was taking time to address these baseless allegations. But Michael knew better. The senator had fled, just like all cowards do when their crimes come to light. His empty mansion and hurriedly packed closets told the real story. Michael didn't wait. He implemented the next phase of his plan, working with trusted journalists to release the documents strategically. He made sure the most heartbreaking cases reached the public first. The evidence spread like wildfire across social media and news outlets. Every hour brought new revelations, new horrors, new proof of the system's corruption. Phone lines at advocacy organizations lit up as people called to report similar experiences. Rachel and Daniel Whitmore stepped forward, their faces drawn with emotion as they spoke to reporters outside the courthouse. Rachel's voice shook as she described how they had been unknowing participants in a corrupt system. Her hands trembled as she clutched a photo of Maya. "We thought we were helping a child in need," Rachel said, tears streaming down her face. "Instead, we were part of a system that stole children from loving families. We can't stay silent anymore. What happened to Maya and her father could have happened to anyone." Daniel stood beside her, his jaw set with determination. His normally calm demeanor was replaced with righteous anger. "We're coming forward because these families deserve justice. Maya deserves justice. Every child deserves to know their real family. We were blind to what was happening, but now our eyes are open." Their testimony opened the floodgates. Survivors began coming forward, parents who had lost their children, families torn apart by false accusations. Each story followed the same pattern. Black parents targeted, children taken, rights terminated through manufactured evidence. The similarities were too striking to be coincidental. A mother in Detroit described how her daughter was taken after a false neglect report filed the day after she complained about housing conditions. A father in Atlanta revealed how he was framed for drug possession when he started asking questions about his son's removal. The stories poured in, each one adding to the mounting evidence against Beckett and his conspirators. Hundreds of families, thousands of children. The numbers were staggering. Federal agents raided multiple facilities across the country, following leads from the stolen documents. They found more children, more evidence, more proof of the systematic destruction of Black families. The scale of the operation was staggering, spanning at least 15 states and affecting countless lives. Camera crews captured the moment federal agents led children out of a facility in Virginia, some reuniting with parents who had been searching for years. Tearful embraces played out on live television as families were made whole again. Similar scenes played out across the country as more facilities were discovered and raided. The nation watched, horrified and transfixed. The pressure became too much. Beckett's carefully constructed network began to crumble as conspirators turned on each other, hoping to save themselves. Social workers confessed to falsifying reports under pressure from supervisors. Judges admitted to rushing through termination orders for financial kickbacks. Police officers revealed their role in framing innocent parents. The conspiracy had tentacles everywhere. Then came the breakthrough. A tip from an airport employee with a conscience. Beckett had been spotted trying to board a private plane to a non-extradition country, his face partially disguised by sunglasses and a hat. Federal agents moved in swiftly, surrounding the small airfield before he could escape. The arrest was captured on dozens of cameras. Senator Charles Beckett, his expensive suit now wrinkled, being led away in handcuffs. His face, usually composed for the cameras, showed real fear for the first time. The man who had destroyed so many families was finally facing consequences. Michael stood outside the federal courthouse, watching as Beckett was escorted up the steps by U.S. Marshals. The once powerful senator looked small now, his shoulders hunched, his wrists bound in steel. Justice was slow, but it had finally arrived. Maya stood beside Michael, holding tightly to David's hand. David Quinn, finally free, finally reunited with his daughter, stood tall, his years of wrongful imprisonment evident in his eyes, but not in his spirit. The sunlight caught the silver streaks in his hair, earned through years of suffering. He had been one of the hundreds freed during the facility raids, his innocence finally proven through the stolen documents. "You did it, Uncle Michael," Maya whispered, looking up at him with those bright, knowing eyes that had started it all when she recognized him in that courtroom. Her smile held all the hope in the world. Michael smiled down at his niece, then at his brother. "No, kid, we all did." He placed a gentle hand on Maya's shoulder, feeling the weight of their journey and the promise of healing ahead. A week after Beckett's arrest, the morning sun filtered through the tall windows of Judge Monroe's chambers, casting long shadows across the rich mahogany furniture. The room felt heavy with emotion as Michael, David, Rachel, Daniel, and little Maya gathered for what would be a pivotal moment in their intertwined lives. Maya sat close to David, her small hand wrapped tightly around his arm. Her eyes darted occasionally to Rachel and Daniel, a mix of love and confusion evident in her young face. The past week had been a whirlwind of adjustments as she tried to understand that the father she barely remembered was now back in her life. Judge Monroe sat behind her desk, her usual stern demeanor softened by the weight of the moment. She shuffled through the papers before her, each document representing pieces of Maya's complicated journey. "What happened to Maya," Judge Monroe began, her voice clear and measured, "represents a fundamental failure of our system. A system that was meant to protect children but instead became a tool for destroying families." Rachel dabbed at her eyes with a tissue while Daniel held her hand, his jaw tight with emotion. They had spent countless nights discussing this moment, knowing it was coming, knowing it was right, but that didn't make it any easier. "The adoption of Maya Quinn by Rachel and Daniel Whitmore is hereby voided," Judge Monroe declared, her gavel striking with finality. "Full legal custody is restored to her biological father, David Quinn." David's shoulders shook slightly as he pulled Maya closer. After 5 years of separation, after being wrongfully imprisoned and silenced, he was finally, legally, her father again. But Judge Monroe wasn't finished. She turned her attention to Rachel and Daniel, her expression softening. However, this court acknowledges the role the Whitmores played in protecting Maya during this ordeal. Their love and care for her is undeniable, and their willingness to stand up against corruption when the truth came to light speaks to their character. Rachel and Daniel nodded, tears flowing freely now. They had come to terms with losing Maya, but hearing their role acknowledged helped ease some of the pain. The foster system failed Maya, Judge Monroe continued, her voice rising with conviction. It has failed thousands of children. That ends today. She looked at each person in the room, her gaze intense. This case will serve as a catalyst for change. As the weeks passed, the impact of Maya's case rippled across the nation. Federal investigators worked tirelessly, following leads from Beckett's files. Each day brought new revelations, new arrests, new stories of families torn apart by corruption. Social workers who had falsified reports were led away in handcuffs. Judges who had rubber-stamped illegal removals faced disbarment. Politicians who had profited from the scheme saw their careers crumble. The system that had seemed untouchable was finally being dismantled. Survivors began coming forward in droves. Parents who had lost their children shared their stories on national news. Families who had been labeled as unfit solely because of their race spoke out about the systematic bias they had faced. Their testimonies painted a devastating picture of institutional racism, masked as child protection. Rachel and Daniel, though no longer Maya's legal parents, found a new purpose. They channeled their grief into action, working with advocacy groups to push for reforms. Their unique perspective as former adoptive parents who had unknowingly participated in an unjust system lent weight to their testimony before state legislators. Michael transformed his legal practice entirely. The corporate lawyer who had once handled mergers and acquisitions now focused exclusively on civil rights cases, particularly in family law. His office became a beacon for families fighting against discriminatory practices in the foster care system. But amid the public victories, private struggles remained. David faced the challenging task of rebuilding his relationship with Maya. 5 years had been stolen from them. Years of first words, first steps, first days of school. Though Maya remembered him in her heart, building trust took time. Rachel and Daniel's absence left a void in Maya's daily routine. She missed the bedtime stories Rachel would read, the way Daniel would push her on the swings. One evening, as David tucked her into bed, he noticed her unusual quietness. Maya fidgeted with her blanket, her small voice barely a whisper. "Will I ever see them again?" David felt his chest tighten at the question. He had been dreading this moment, knowing it would come. Looking into his daughter's eyes, he saw fear of losing more people she loved. "Of course, baby girl," he answered softly, smoothing her hair. "Love doesn't disappear. Rachel and Daniel will always be part of your life, just in a different way now." Maya's shoulders relaxed slightly at his words. She snuggled deeper into her blankets as David continued to stroke her hair, watching as her eyelids grew heavy with sleep. In the quiet of Maya's room, David sat watching his daughter's peaceful face. The soft glow of her nightlight cast gentle shadows across her features that had changed so much in the years they were apart. His heart ached for the time they had lost, but swelled with gratitude for having her back. 1 year later, sunlight dappled through the trees at Memorial Park, casting dancing shadows on the freshly cut grass. Maya's laughter rang out across the playground as she darted between the swings and slides, her curly hair bouncing with each step. At 6 years old, she moved with the boundless energy that only children possess, her bright yellow dress making her look like a sunbeam in motion. David sat on a wooden bench nearby, his shoulders relaxed in a way they hadn't been for years. Beside him, Michael watched his niece play, a content smile on his face. The past year had brought healing none of them had thought possible. "She's doing so well in school," David said softly, his eyes never leaving Maya. "Her teacher says she's reading above grade level." Michael nodded, pride evident in his expression. "She gets that from you. You always had your nose in a book when we were kids." The spring breeze carried the scent of blooming flowers as Rachel and Daniel appeared on the path, carrying a large wicker picnic basket between them. Maya spotted them immediately, her face lighting up with joy. "Rachel, Daniel!" She sprinted toward them, nearly bowling Rachel over with the force of her hug. Rachel laughed, steadying herself while keeping a careful grip on her side of the basket. "Careful there, sunshine," Daniel chuckled, reaching down to ruffle Maya's hair. "We brought your favorite sandwiches." David rose from the bench, walking over to help them with the basket. The initial awkwardness between them had faded over the months, replaced by a shared understanding and respect. They had all learned that love could expand, making room for everyone who cared about Maya. Rachel spread out a checkered blanket on a sunny patch of grass, while Daniel unpacked containers of food. Maya bounced excitedly around them, pointing out her favorite treats as they emerged from the basket. "Look, Daddy." Rachel made her special chocolate chip cookies, Maya exclaimed, tugging on David's sleeve. "Did she now?" David smiled warmly at Rachel. "Those are the best ones." They settled onto the blanket, passing around plates and napkins. Maya nestled between David and Rachel, accepting bites of sandwich from both of them. Michael sat cross-legged across from them, watching the scene with quiet satisfaction. The world had shifted dramatically since Beckett's arrest. New legislation had been passed in multiple states, creating strict guidelines to prevent the forced separation of Black children from their families. The adoption system had undergone a complete overhaul, with new policies ensuring biological families received support and resources before any outside placement was considered. Michael's foundation, the David Quinn Initiative, had become a powerful force for change. They provided legal support to families fighting unjust separations, offered counseling services to reunited families, and worked tirelessly to expose and prevent systemic racism in child welfare. The foundation just opened its third office, Michael mentioned between bites of potato salad. "We're helping families in 3 states now." "That's wonderful," Rachel said sincerely. She and Daniel had become vocal advocates themselves, sharing their story to help other adoptive parents understand the importance of questioning the system. Maya reached for both David's and Rachel's hands, holding them as she listened to the adults talk. The gesture wasn't lost on anyone. It was her way of showing that she had enough love for all of them. As the afternoon wore on, they shared stories and laughter. Maya regaled them with tales from her kindergarten adventures, acting out particularly dramatic moments with elaborate hand gestures. Daniel taught her how to make daisy chains while Rachel helped her spot shapes in the clouds drifting overhead. The sun began its descent, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink. Maya tugged on David's sleeve, her eyes bright with anticipation. "Daddy, can I get on your shoulders, please?" David's face softened as he helped her climb up, securing her legs against his chest. Maya squealed with delight as she rose above everyone else, her small hands resting on top of her father's head. The setting sun cast long shadows across the park as Maya gazed at the colorful sky. "Hey, Daddy," she asked, her voice thoughtful. David tilted his head slightly, careful not to disturb her balance. "Yeah, baby?" She squeezed his hands where they held her legs steady. "Thank you for coming back." David's eyes glistened as he lifted her off his shoulders and into his arms, pressing a gentle kiss to her forehead. "I never left," he whispered, holding her close. Michael watched the tender moment between his brother and niece, his heart full. After years of fighting corrupt systems and seemingly insurmountable odds, justice had finally prevailed. The sight of Maya safe in her father's arms, surrounded by people who loved her, was proof that sometimes good really did triumph. If you enjoyed the story of Maya, I handpicked this next story that you will love. Don't miss it. Click here to watch it. Surrounded by people who loved her, was proof that sometimes good really did triumph. If you enjoyed the story of Maya, I handpicked this next story that you will love. Don't miss it. Click here to watch it.